Oh, hello, everybody. How are you? Welcome back. I hope you had a good break. Uh, our next presenter is Linda Hartford from CIBC, who will be speaking about the importance of budgeting. We all know how important that is. And we're here with Taylor Rupert, and they will be discussing their their knowledge of finances, investments to ensure us a prosperous future for our generations to come. So I welcome you all, and the platform is yours.
Thank you, Adam. Good morning, everyone. My name is Taylor Rupert. I'm in the Indigenous Markets Group at CIBC, and I work alongside Linda Hartford. I'm going to open up the presentation this morning, and I'll be talking to you about saving money, and then Linda will turn it over, and she'll talk to you about budgeting. So we're going to make this as interactive as possible. Please ask questions throughout, and I'll be pausing so that questions can be asked, and hopefully I'll have or direct you to some answers that will be helpful. So I'll start off with the topic of the concept of saving money and how it can help you in the long term. So I'll flip to the next slide here. And then the next one after that. Thank you. So we'll be going through these topics just so everyone knows the roles of money, recognizing there's an emotionality of money, financial education, some needs and wants, and some interesting concepts here. So I hope it'll keep you all, it'll leave you all with some really good knowledge. We'll flip to the next slide and we'll get it started. Great. So here, what we want to talk about is this, let's just take a step back and look at how we want to use money. And we always want to be in control. So we want to recognize the role that money plays in our life. And what it could be looked at, and what we would recommend, is that you see it as it provides you options and freedom and time. And you want to understand money because it gives you the power to control what you want in your life. So here we want to pause and think, okay, well, rarely do we align our goals in life to our spending and our savings and our overall consumption. So we want to start with saying that we want to align our goals to our money habits. And when you understand the priorities in your life, then we are in control of making our money work for our goals. And money could have all the power over you, but we don't want that. We want to have power over our money, and we want to make money work towards our goals. So when you understand this, you're in control. So we'll flip it to the next slide. Here, also recognizing, and I love this slide, and I'll bring your attention to the quote at the bottom by Tony Robbins, just saying that the quality of your life equals the quality of your emotions. And we couldn't give a talk about money without recognizing that there's a huge emotional aspect of managing your money. One of them, or some of them here, can be that you're intimidated by it. You have financial fears. You feel overwhelmed or anxious about this topic of money. So it's important to reflect on that, so that you know that money has this particular huge aspect to it that is emotional. And so when you know that, you're in that much closer of a space to being in control of how money can work for you. So we'll go to the next slide. This part, so recognizing that to be in control requires financial education, and having the right tools and the knowledge and the confidence to make strong financial decisions, which is what hopefully this presentation is bringing light to. And we want to recognize that we need to be proactive. So it's not as if you go out every day and you're given financial education. It's rarely taught in school, and there can be very conflicting opinions between family members and friends and icons and social media, and you need to be proactive in your approach to managing and giving yourself financial education. one of the great resources that I put here is called Canada.ca. Is it pays to know? So that's a very good website. There's great resources out there, online platforms such as Wealth Simple, and CIBC also has some great resources on our website of how to manage your money. So please reach out to us, and we have some great resources for you to take advantage of. And I want to go over this interesting concept too, is that financial education requires discipline. And it requires discipline because you're saving money for your future self, and your present self has to make the actions for your future self. So recognizing that there is this awesome trade-off and a reward there that you're doing for your future self. Are there any questions on that so far? It's an interesting topic there.
No, keep going, Taylor. Nothing so far.
All good. Perfect. Okay, so we'll flip to the next slide. So slide 6. This was an overview of everything that we've discussed already. Again, controlling your money and then the benefits of financial education. So quite literally, it would translate into a higher credit score, but you'd see other things as reduced stress, better health, generally stronger relationships in your life, and reduces anxiety and confidence in managing your money. So there's plenty of great benefits, as I'm sure we're all aware of. We'll flip to the next slide. So here is a really strong one, which is recognizing that we need to evaluate our needs in life and our wants in life and how you want to allocate your money towards that. So obviously your needs is where your money should be going towards: your housing and your rent, your tuition, your groceries, your gas, and your utility payments. And the parts of your life that have options to spend your money on would be, you know, a big truck, or eating out, video games, brand new clothes, going to the movies, things like that, that you can evaluate, reallocate your money towards building wealth, which will ultimately put you in a better place in the long run in your life. We'll go to the next slide. So now we're going to get into the topic of building your wealth through the concept of saving your money. And that is from taking your money away from your wants in your life and allocating that to growing your assets. And that's being able to start saving your money. And we want to tap into this concept of saving your money into an interest-bearing account or investing your money. And then we'll talk about the power of compound interest. So we'll flip to the next slide. So here is a good example of how you can put aside your money that you would want to put on wants and put them into growing your assets. So here is an example. $10 on a meal 3 times a week is a want. Purchasing clothing, maybe about $35 a week, to spending money on toys and those kind of things can build up to maybe around even $360 a month. This is just a general idea. And then it could grow to about $4,000 a year. And in that 1 year, if you do that consistently over 50 years, you're looking at around $200,000. So we'll flip to the next slide to see how this concept of, instead, if you were to save that money, it could really grow your wealth. So here you'll see, even if you were to invest $5 and you would earn interest on that $5 over 50 years, I'll highlight the concept of compound interest here. If you were to save that money, so here you'll see in the light gray that if you invested $5, that $5 would stay in that light gray, but you would earn interest on that, and that would grow over time because every year you invest the $5 and you earn 5%, but the next year you have $5 plus the 5% plus another 5%. So that interest grows every year and you're able to earn money on your interest. And then that is the compound interest there in the dark gray that grows over time, which is your money works for you. We'll flip to the next slide. So here it's showing this power of saving and using compound interest. If you were to save, for example, all of your wants of around the 4,000 that we showed earlier, and you were to do that annually for about 50 years and invest it at 3%, then it could potentially grow to about $500,000 by year 50. So showing the power of growing your wealth because of the interest that grows and the ability for you to sock aside money every year. We'll go to the next slide. Here is showing that even if there is a change in the interest rate, so example, if you invest that money until 50 years, but the interest rate is 5%, you'd have almost $1 million at the 907,000 there. And then if it was 3%, though, you'd have around $500,000. So it's just being cognizant that the effect of the interest rate is quite large over time. So we'll go to the next slide. This is a really interesting concept here. This is showing the power of time. So again, we have two scenarios here. They're both over 50 years. And the first chart shows if you were to invest $2,000 a year in the first 10 years of an example, at the end, you would have about $442,000, and your total investment would be $20,000. And then we want to show, and that's also at an interest rate of 7% in this example. And if you look at the second chart, it's showing that if you did not invest any money in the first 10 years of this example, but instead you invested $2,000 starting from year 11 to year 50, so later on you're starting your investments, you would have total money socked aside of your own money of $80,000, and you would have about 427. So it's a lower amount of money that you have socked aside because you started your investments later. And that has to do with compound interest and also this effect of starting to invest your money early. Are there any questions on that? This is a pretty powerful one because it's showing that if you start early, even with a lower amount of money, you have more money in the long term. But in the second one, you're putting away even more money, but because you started later, you actually have less. So there's a power of time here. And we'll go to the next slide. This one is getting even deeper in this example, but it's showing again the power of starting early, but the effect that the interest rate has on you over a span of 50 years. So really what's working with you for you is the interest rate, so and also time. So the interest rate here, if let's say for example you're able to secure earnings of around 12% on your money, so that would be typical if you were investing your money in stocks or indexes, so not in a typical savings account. If you were to do 12% over 50 years, you could have a balance of 3.5 million if you were to just start saving those $2,000 in the first 10 years and you just socked it away. But you can see how it really doesn't grow unless your interest rate is quite promising at the 12%, and you have to also start early. So it's just showing that the effect and the power of getting a strong interest rate is quite telling here. And when you are low, it actually doesn't affect a lower interest rate. It doesn't affect it very much. If you see from 7 to 1%. So just power of starting early too. We'll go to the next slide.
Maybe one of the things we could comment on is for individuals that do have some money to save, how do they go about seeking a good interest rate? And I'm happy to speak to it if you, or you can, whatever you like. So it's important.
I think that's maybe a really good one for you, Linda, yeah.
If you have some money set aside in a savings account and you're looking for how to invest it, again, it's that getting it in early and getting a good rate. And so when you're negotiating a rate with your bank or with whoever you're going to deal with, it's important to shop it around and see what you can get. And it's also important to look at the term, because when you're investing money for the short term, like if you think you might have to draw it out in 6 months, you're going to get a lower rate. So committing to that savings plan and committing to keeping that money saved will help you get a better rate. And also educating yourself on different products that are available, because something like a savings account is going to earn a lot less than something like a mutual fund that buys and holds stocks. It's a lot easier to earn that 5 to 8% when you hold stocks. Right now, a savings account is probably paying you 0.3%, and that's only because interest rates are at historic lows. So it's really important to educate yourself on the different types of savings vehicles that are available, and how being willing to lock at least some of it in for the longer term will help you earn a better rate. Hopefully that makes some sense. Sorry to interrupt, Taylor.
Very good. Thank you, Linda. It's important to say here that there's a certain width that falls under certain risk levels of, when I say bandwidth, I mean the bandwidth of the interest rate that you can get. So it's important to know, which investment vehicles fit the interest rate that you would like to get. There's many different kinds, and again, we're here to discuss what is appropriate for you and what you're looking for. So we'll get back to
we had
the slide here.
A question posed, Taylor, where the question was, what if the stock market crashes? So someone's invested in the stock market and something happens and the stock market goes down. How do they recover? And so I can comment on that. So these days, practically every time Donald Trump tweets, the stock market goes down. And then everybody calms down and it recovers. And so it's important, if you're going to hold any kind of investments like stock, that you do, again, have to have that long-term view. The stock market tends to be volatile short-term. In my house with my teenagers, we joke that it goes up and down like a toilet seat. I have boys and girls. So it is important to know that it does go like this on a daily basis. Donald Trump will tweet, or something will happen and it'll go down and then it recovers. So the long-term trajectory of holding stocks tends to kind of go like this, but on the short term, it goes like that. So again, it's just staying with it, staying with your strategy, picking a strategy that you feel comfortable with. If you're not comfortable with that short-term volatility, or you think you're going to need your money out sooner and you can't bear that short-term volatility, like you need to know that that $500 is going to be there at the end of the month, or whatever it is that you need, then you probably want to choose a different short-term investment. But over time, the markets have always indicated that a buy and hold strategy is how you will continue to make money. And over time, for example, the Canadian stock market has returned an average of about 9% over the last 35 years. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you, Linda, again. So that, I think, is such a great point, and just saying how that also ties into where we started this presentation, which is the emotionality of money, and recognizing that you will be anxious. It is normal for you to feel that when something goes up and when something goes down. But the really core part of you to build your wealth, that secret that you just need to know so to the core of you, is that in the long term, it will grow. If you have a diversified enough portfolio, it will grow, and you have to be okay when it goes down. You have to expect that it's going to go down. Of course it will, and not react, and to buy and hold for the long term, because in 50 years, it will, if you've made a good choice in your investment, which the bank can help you advise you on, it will grow, and that is what history has told us. So that core concept is a really good tidbit. So I'll get, and this is actually goes right into this whole story that I have here, which I love so much. So this is the concept of paying yourself first, and it's a very key part of building your wealth. And this concept means basically when you get your paycheck, pay yourself with it for the long term, in the sense that you take off a piece of it and you invest it and you put it in your savings and you set it aside to build your wealth, and you're paying yourself. And this is the best way to do it is to make it as easy as possible. So you set up automatic percentage withdrawals off of your paycheck, so you're showing discipline and you're investing in your future. So this is an example of this kind of a concept by this gentleman, Theodore Johnson, who used to work at UPS. This is an American example, but with American companies, but the concept applies in the Canadian markets. So Johnson worked his way up at UPS, but he started at a lower salary. So back in the day, early 1900s, his salary annually was $14,000, and he retired in 1952. But during this time that he worked in UPS, he bought equities. So he bought the UPS stock as much as he could, maxed out his paycheck to set aside money to invest in his stock. And by the time that he retired, even though he was at such a low salary bracket within the company, he had saved about $700,000, which is also a reflection of the stock doing very well too. So that has a tie in it. So the point here is that his mentality was just as if there was this new law where the government raised taxes by 20%. So it was this obligatory tax that he had to pay. He would find a way to pay it. So he put aside 20% of every paycheck into an investment account, as if it was an increase for taxes. So again, this is playing on the emotionality of money and how he did it, convincing himself and just playing this cute trick on himself that he had to pay it. But in reality, he didn't. But it paid off for him, because this whole strategy, he actually retired with $70 million. And that was a reflection of compound investing. So by the time he retired, he had 700,000, and that grew after 45 years to 70 million. So the point of this is that it's not really the amount of money that you make that will build your wealth. It's how you manage that money. And I just think that's such a powerful example of what the beginning slides that I talked about here, and how that can really go into fruition in life, and how you can really make it work for you. For time and compound investing are very powerful things. And that wraps up my part on saving. So any questions that you have, happy to answer them right now before we switch to budgeting. So I have a question here about, the question is that this individual has been reading about stock markets and the TFSA, so a tax-free savings account. Would you be able to explain a little bit about it and how to start? So any Canadian has access to the tax-free saving account, and this one is basically a tax shelter that the government will give you, and you have to register all of your inflows into this account. So it's a registered account, which can be set up at CIBC. And as that relates to the stock market, you can put cash in this account, or you can invest that cash within this account. And when you invest that money, if let's say you pick a stock and you invest it and the stock goes up, that gain is all yours and you don't have to pay taxes on those gains. And that's the concept of the tax-free savings. However, I will say every year you have a cap on the amount of money that you can put into this tax sheltered account. And I don't know, that I think it's around 5,000 every year once you reach an adult age. So you're allowed to invest this much and then take advantage of not paying taxes. And the great thing about this too is that, let's say, for example, in Theodore Johnson's case, he put in, he invested in UPS and he made $700,000 into 70 million. If he invested it underneath the cap, it's $270 million tax-free if that stock were to grow to that amount. So that's an extreme example. But this is just showing that once it's in this tax shelter, you can take it out tax-free. I hope that, I'm not an expert on TFSAs, but that's just the general gist of it that I know. Linda, maybe you can jump in there to explain it better.
Yeah, for sure. So TFSAs are available through any banks and credit unions in Canada. So wherever you're doing your day-to-day banking, you can go in and make an appointment to speak to someone about opening one. And as Taylor said, the important thing about a TFSA is as long as you're within that cap of the amount you're allowed to put in, and they'll actually only let you put that amount in. So if you put that, I think it's $5,500 this year actually, but it's around $5,000. If you put that amount in, any income you earn on that account remains tax sheltered, so you never have to pay income tax on it. So for many individuals, it's a great way to start a savings because you're not going to have to pay tax on it. So I think we're ready to go into budgeting. If we could have the next slide, please. Go ahead, another one. So when we talk about budgeting, and the reason we started with savings and the emotionality of money is just to help people understand that setting aside that money up front is what's going to be really the magic to creating a savings account and to building some wealth and to accomplishing the things that you want with your money. And those things can be simple things like, you know, affording to take a nice trip next summer holidays. Let's hope there's not COVID and we can all travel. Many people use savings as a way to save for a big purchase like a car, or to help put aside money for their university or college. So savings is such an important concept, and it's really the whole magic in getting there is using a budget to get you to a point where you can create that savings, create it early, start getting some money put aside for yourself and start building that future wealth. I would say that the early decision making is so important. It's so important for young people to learn about saving money. My kids are all in their late teens and early 20s. They all have part-time jobs, and I've encouraged them all to do some basic savings to put some money aside for themselves. And I think people are quite surprised how quickly it grows. That being said, budgeting is for everyone. I've worked with elders in communities on helping them do a budget because they sometimes have limited income and need to make sure that they plan for how to use it and plan effectively. And the other important thing, we're going to go through a budgeting exercise, but the other important thing to remember is that your budgeting is an ongoing exercise. It's not a one and done. So usually you start by doing a budget and then you have to keep revisiting it and adjusting it. So for a lot of people, something like COVID really impacted their budget, where people were suddenly not working or maybe had less income or some additional expenses. And so going back and revisiting that budget and re-looking at where you can tweak it is really important. And some of the concepts we're going to talk about here in budgeting, like paying yourself first and setting some of that aside, are little tricks that can help you get through these really difficult times like COVID, or where you lose your job or are laid off. So let's go and get started on our budgeting exercise. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this is the basics of how a budget works. It's really quite simple. It's looking at your income and your expenses and what you can afford. So if you look at your total income or the money you make, a lot of people have part-time jobs. Some people even get scholarship funds or other funds that come in regularly, bursaries. Some people do things like chores or tutoring, helping other families or their own family and get paid for that, or any other activity where you earn an income. So we start by recording that. The next thing we are going to record is what kind of expenses do we have? Where is our money going to? And for most people, this is the really hard part of the exercise, is actually spending that time to track what you're spending your money on. For me, I know when I revisit my budget, I'm often surprised to see, you know, how much money I spent at Starbucks in a month. And probably it's something that I never budgeted for because I didn't think it was important. But when you add up that $5 a day, it can really be taking a big part of your budget. So at the end of our exercise, what we hope to get to is a point where we have savings, where we're underspending, so we have money left over after we pay our expenses, that we can start to save and start to accumulate and grow for our future needs and for our future goals. But for a lot of people, their budget ends up starting out with an overspending, where if you go through your bank account and you write down everything you've spent your money on, it can identify that you're spending more than you are making, and that often is why people end up going into debt. So a budgeting exercise is really helpful. I would say the main thing is to get a handle on our expenses and start to look at where we're spending our money and putting some discipline on that. If we can go to the next page, please. So two important concepts in budgeting. The first is called an emergency fund. And basically what an emergency fund is allocating some of your paycheck or your income to a separate account. I use a savings account, and just putting some money aside, even a little bit every pay, $10, whatever you can afford. And that most financial planning articles talk about, you know, a pay yourself savings account and an emergency fund. And they usually recommend that you try to accumulate about 3 months worth of your expenses in an emergency account. And the whole point of having an emergency account is if you lose your job, or you have to give up your job because of your studies, or in a circumstance like COVID, where a lot of people lost their job, is so that they have some money to be able to get through that difficult period. The other concept that Taylor's already spoken about is a pay yourself account first. And a lot of people, and I use my emergency fund account, and I continue to contribute money to that every paycheck so that I have a little bit more money set aside than just my emergency fund, so that I've got a little bit of money set aside for myself if something comes up that I need to buy or that I want to buy, that I have some money there to do that. And by setting these funds aside, you're already starting to take advantage of that compound interest concept. So even if you just set enough aside for your emergency account, with the interest on that, it would start to accumulate some additional funds. And this is going to be, you know, the basis for starting to get yourself out of debt and get yourself ahead. If we can go to the next page. So we provided a template. I'm hoping everybody got it, and if not, our emails are at the end and we can send it out. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go through this template, and this is the basis of creating a budget. So the 4 steps are, first of all, you need a form. So we've provided one. There's certainly others available online. Some of them are more interactive. There's also software. There's different programs available where you can actually track your savings into a spreadsheet, and then it will compile it for you each month. That can be a great exercise if you're not really sure where your money's going. And a lot of businesses use that as well to keep track of where their money's going. So entering the information is important, and it's important that you're accurate, and particularly when you're doing your first budget, that you are actually looking at everywhere you are spending money and being honest about that. Otherwise, you know, your budget will look like you have money left over, but in reality you don't, because you haven't included things. And then we want to try to balance that budget to get it under budget, so we can start doing things like saving, investing, setting aside an emergency fund. And then I usually tell people to plan to revisit your budget when there's a major change, or at a minimum every few months, and just give it a quick check and ask yourself what's changed. Most of the banks on their online banking platforms now will help break down your expenses into categories. And I like to look at that on my bank accounts every month, because it just gives me an idea of whether I'm actually living within my budget, or whether I'm spending, you know, more at Starbucks than I'm supposed to be spending at the grocery store, and whether I'm spending more on clothes than I've allocated in my budget. So those kind of online tools can be really helpful for revisiting your budget. So let's skip ahead. So if you have the template, this is what it looks like, and we'll work through one together. But if you don't have it, you could print it later and fill it in and just follow along, or you can even just follow along by making some notes on just a piece of paper. So let's get going on this and go to the next slide, please. So now that we have a template we can use, or whatever template you're going to choose to use, these are the steps that we're going to have to follow to build a budget. So first of all, we're going to need to know, what are we making? And for some people that's consistent. They maybe work, you know, 10 hours a week at a part-time job. Some people work full-time, but some people's income is not always consistent, so it can be a bit harder. If your income isn't consistent, I would suggest that you try to estimate an average of what it's been over the last year. And then you also want to include any extra income. So if you maybe do some part-time or seasonal work, you want to, again, average that in. Then we want to include our regular expenses, so bills that you know you have to pay, rent, your cell phone, things like that. And then once you have those in, you want to start looking at, so what are some of those regular spending habits? And that can be a great place to go through your bank account and see, you know, for me, I have a Starbucks addiction. So I tend to spend too much money at Starbucks, but I like to keep track of it. So I look at how much I spend when I go out for dinner, how much I spend at the mall or shopping online. I know, like a lot of people, I've been doing a lot of shopping online. And then it's also important to not include things that you aren't paying for. So for example, I sometimes see people include their tuition, but then they get a bursary or a scholarship for that, or maybe even their parents or a family member are helping them pay for that. So it's important that we include things, only things that we're spending. It's also good if you've got a savings goal in mind. For anyone that's trying to plan for education, I always say make sure you're setting aside some money in your budget for your education costs or another large purchase, and then also for something like an emergency fund. So just including all those things. It's fine to include things that are wants, but what we're going to find is if we do our dream fantasy budget and we put absolutely everything in that we would like to have, chances are we're going to have to roll some of those wants back out to get our balance, our budget to balance, at least initially. So let's go ahead to the first section. So we would start by at the top of the worksheet of filling in what is our income. And there's just some basic calculations here. Some people have a monthly check, some people have a weekly check, and it's just averaging it to get to a monthly income. And it's important as well that that's your take-home income. So if you have a job on your reserve, then you're probably not paying tax on that income. But if you have a job in your local city or community, you probably are paying tax. And it's important that we budget in after-tax dollars because that's the only money we're going to have to spend. So we can skip ahead beyond income. And I'll just pause for a second to make sure that nobody has any questions. I'm just looking through the chat and I don't see anything. So I'll keep going for now. So budgeting for expenses is a little bit harder. So I always start with the things that are fixed and known. So in this example, we've put rent of $550. So if you start by filling in your fixed expense, your rent, some people have a hydro bill, your phone bill. For most of us, we have a fixed contract, so we know what our phone bill is. Maybe something like our gym membership would be a fixed amount. If you take any regular medication, that might be sort of a regular monthly amount. So go through and fill in those regular and fairly fixed amounts first. And then for things like your groceries and going out to restaurants, clothing, I usually suggest people kind of go through their last 3 months of their bank or their debit records to try to be reasonable and accurate about what you're really spending. I know in my family, I do like a regular weekly grocery shop, but it's really easy to forget about extra things that I buy during the week, or that, you know, sushi that I got as takeout on my way home from work. So I find by going through your records, you can get more accurate numbers. Obviously, your transportation, things like a bus pass or a car payment are important. And then once you get through sort of your day-to-day expenses, then you can also, and sorry, the one thing category we haven't talked about are things like pets. If you have a pet, you want to make sure you're including their costs of their regular food, and if they go to doggy daycare or anything, those regular costs. And then we want to get down to looking at things like what can we save. So if we were to set aside even just $10 every other week on our paycheck, then that gives us a little bit of an emergency fund, and that's so important for when some unforeseen expense comes up. Yesterday, I took my car into the shop and I found out I need a $500 repair. So just having a bit of money set aside means that I can go ahead and do that. I also encourage particularly older people to set aside a bit for their retirement fund, but also younger people, because remember earlier in the presentation, Taylor showed us how setting aside even just that $10 over time, if you do that continually and you invest it, how that can grow to be so much more for your retirement fund, rather than if you wait till you're 50 and start saving then. And then the other thing a lot of young people do is set aside some money for college. So in this example, we've set aside $15 every other week out of the paycheck, or $32 a month approximately. So you'll see that in our budget example here, and everybody's is going to be different, of course, that we've come up with a total biweekly and monthly expense. So let's go to the next page. And this is where we start to see whether we're within our budget or not. So in our example, we assumed that we had a monthly net income of about almost $1,600 a month from somewhat part-time work. And then conveniently, Taylor made it work. So our budget came in under at $1,559. And again, this is why it's so important to be real with your budget, so that your numbers are real. And this is where you're going to see whether you're going to have any leftover money in a surplus to be able to save, or whether you're running a deficit. And if you're running a deficit, that's where you're going to want to go back and look at what could you trim back. Could you reduce your clothing purchases? Could you maybe start taking the bus instead of driving your car to save a bit of money on fuel, and just being realistic about what is a need and what is a want at this time. And of course, over time, most people tend to move into jobs where they earn more money, and it tends to get easier. But certainly for young people, it can be very difficult to balance your budget. So for our example, and just because we wanted to show the net impact, is we had a surplus left over of just over $20 a month. And so obviously for anyone who's able to balance their budget and they have money left over, they now have a decision about what they want to do. So some of the examples below are, you could definitely set aside that surplus for something you wanted to save for the future. If you wanted to maybe save to buy a car, if you're saving for your tuition, or otherwise you could just generally start to save it for your future and for a future need or want. So let's skip down to the next page. So here you can see sort of the net impact of what we've saved this month on our budget. So because we already were in our budget setting aside that emergency fund, and to Taylor's earlier comments about this, it is so important to pay yourself first, to set aside a bit of money for those unforeseen expenses that come up, or those times that you're sick and you can't go to work for a week and you still need to pay your bills. So setting aside that emergency fund is so important. But you can see now the net impact is we have this extra $20 a month left over. And so we've gone from, in our budget, putting aside $65 to pay ourselves first, to now we have $86 to pay yourself first. And that's a month. So if you add that up over the year, you can see that you're getting to some decent level of savings. And if you're able to save even just that amount every month for 10 years, you would probably be putting yourself into a really great position for the kind of trips you want to take, for buying new vehicles, and for having savings for your retirement. The hard part about savings is that there's never really one answer, and everyone has their own needs and goals. And so much like the rest of this budgeting exercise, it's just being real with yourself around how much can you save, and what are the various needs and wants that you want to accomplish with that, and then making those tough decisions around how much are you going to spend on that new car, or for that trip you want to take, or how much are you going to save for your rainy day fund or for your future goals. Okay, so I think we can skip ahead. So this is just about revisiting your budget. So obviously things that are going to change in your budget is hopefully your monthly income will increase. I know for my kids, which are in the same age group as many of you, between 15 and 22 are my kids, that your monthly income is going to change over spring break and winter break and summer break. My kids definitely earn more. And then as you finish your schooling, or you gain more employment, or you move into a full-time job, your income will go up. And that's definitely going to impact your budget. It's both going to give you more money to start to have regular expenses like eating out where you have a bit more money, but it's also going to give you a lot more money to start savings. So the next part, of course, is just keeping track of those monthly expenses and including extraordinary expenses, things like a car repair that are going to impact your budget. And then the last part, and I would say the most important part, is have you been sticking to that savings plan? Or it seems like such a small amount just to put aside that 20 bucks or 10 bucks, but at the end you can see it does make a huge difference. And just trying to keep your budget on track, keep to your guns, keep saving that money, keep setting aside those funds for when you have an emergency or something that comes up that you need to pay for, and keeping your budget on track. Something like a large car repair or an unforeseen expense or losing your job can get you into debt really quickly. So it's really important to have a little something tucked aside. So let's go to the next page. Excuse me. So we have now gone through and completed our first budget, and we need to just remember to revisit that budget regularly and to update it and to be real about where we're really spending our money. I've done this exercise in schools with groups of students in classes, and I think a lot of the students are really surprised when they find out how they're spending their money versus what they could be doing with their money. And often, you know, you go to Starbucks or Tim's or whatever it is you do during your regular day, and you don't realize how much that stuff does add up and what you could be doing. And I hope that the earlier part of the presentation, where we looked at just investing a small amount and building that, how you saw that that will really impact your financial future and get you to the place where you can afford that new car and you can afford to build a house for yourself. If we can just go to the next page. So just a couple of closing comments on the budget. The important things again are, you know, staying in control, making sure that you do have money set aside for when you need it, being smart, keeping track of your spending. It helps you to learn your habits. Like I said, a lot of people aren't aware of how much they're spending until they actually start to track it. Things like going for coffee or going to Mickey D's for lunch seem cheap until you add them up and find out that, you know, you probably could have gone to the keg instead if you'd just saved some of those regular trips for fast food or for coffee. And then being ready, just setting aside that money for the period when you need money, when something comes up, when you lose your job. And the best part about the savings is being able to save that money for some big purchase in the future, and not just using it to fix your car or to go and buy, you know, a new lip balm at the grocery store, at Shoppers Drug Mart, and being able to afford to buy something nice. Like for all the ladies on the call, it's really great to be able to go into a nicer shop like Sephora and buy something nice for yourself. So just being mindful of how you're spending your money. If we could just go to the next page. And so here's some tricks for helping you to stay on your budget. Is one of the key elements, definitely when you're going to the grocery store or the clothing store, is to set aside a list for yourself on what things you do need to buy. I know it's so easy when I go to the grocery store to pick up things with bright flashy displays, rather than sticking to my guns and buying things like, you know, lettuce and things that are healthy for my family to eat. So it's really important to make a list. Same when you go to the grocery store. It's so, or when you go to the clothing store, pardon me, it's so easy. You know, you get in there and I like to shop for sales when I'm buying clothes for myself and my kids, but it's so easy to come home with 10 things you didn't really need. So it is really important to make a list when you go. And to set yourself some goals are also really important. Like, what are those things that you want to accomplish? Where could you be saving money? Like, do you need to go get that manicure this week? Do you need to get your eyelashes done? Sorry, I'm sticking to the girly things. Do you need to go motocrossing this weekend? Although, let's be honest, I love motocrossing and I'm a girl. So just setting some goals for yourself and maintaining your motivation so that you know that if you're giving up these little things here, that you're going to get these bigger things that are really important to you. And so not wasting your money on things that really don't give you value. be really careful with credit cards. For most young people, a credit card is a great way to start to build up your credit rating, but it can also be a devastating way to get yourself into debt. Credit cards have very high interest charges. If you can't afford something, don't buy it on a credit card. If it's an emergency and you need to use your credit card, then you need to build into your budget a way for you to pay that off as soon as possible, because that's really going to derail your savings plan if you're paying money on a credit card bill. So someone on the panel just commented on, even finding ways to do things for yourself rather than spending money on it. So her example was, cutting her own hair or doing her own nails so that she has a little extra money to put aside for other things. So again, just looking at where you can save money. And being creative. I know this is all probably, you guys are all sitting there going, oh man, this is total drudgery and I don't want to do this. But I can tell you that for me, being on a budget is something that has really helped me to accomplish things I want in my life. And it's been a really valuable exercise to saving money and to getting ahead and to helping put my kids through school as well and helping support them with their education costs. There's some good ideas here about, doing things like having a clothing swap rather than going to the mall, or inviting friends over to cook rather than going out. So just using some creativity. Cutting your own hair was another great example, just some creativity around ways that you can save money. We can skip ahead, please. So this is my contact information and Taylor's. We're both with the Indigenous Markets team at CIBC. We also have local people in many places across the country. Many of you may deal with other financial institutions and they also have people. If you're interested in getting some help learning more about savings and investment accounts, please go into your local branch where you do your banking and ask to speak to someone or reach out to us. Also, if you need some help putting together your budget or you have questions about how to do it, we're more than happy to help. Somebody just commented on the chat, which is really great, that budgeting has helped them to get out of their credit card debt. And so that's such a great success story. I've had many friends and colleagues over the years who've gotten into a lot of trouble with credit card debt. I've known a number of people personally who, because they got into too much debt with their credit card, had to declare bankruptcy, and it makes it really difficult to dig out of that hole. So if we could all just try to set a budget and stick to it, and of course things change, so let's just keep revisiting it and doing our best and taking it easy on ourselves when we have months that we don't stay within our budget. So I'm just going to pause for questions. We have a few minutes left. If anybody has any further questions. Oh, I had one question posed on how do you find an advisor that's right for you and what should you ask? That's such a great question. I don't even know how to answer that. I would say go and meet with people. It's really important to meet with people. That's hard with COVID. We can't always meet face to face, but just trying to find someone who you feel resonates with you and that you feel comfortable talking to about your money, because that's a pretty intimate conversation. With young people, I often encourage them, if they're going into their local bank or credit union, to ask for if there's an advisor specifically that works with young people and ask about what resources they have. It's just often much easier for them to relate to you than someone who's older. There's often different concerns for young people than there is for older people. So it's good to look for someone that's more in your age group. But I would say the most important thing is just to get someone that you share values with and who you feel is really advising you and not just kind of giving you like the party line. There's lots of good resources available. I think we posted a couple in this site. We have a number on our website, CIBC's website, and all of the banks have resources online. The Government of Canada has resources online, and of course there's lots of things on Google on how to budget, how to manage your budget, how to exercise prudence with your budget, how to practice savings. A question that was just posed was, what advice would I give my younger self about budgeting? I've actually done a really good job with my budgeting. When I got my first full-time job, I started a for myself first plan, and I set up that emergency fund. And so I've been able to always manage that. I've never run credit card debt. I would say that the advice that I give young people all the time is to manage their credit cards. Don't buy things you can't afford, because then you get into a cycle where you can't stay within your budget anymore, and the interest costs add up so quickly, and they put you in a position where now not only are you not able to save for an emergency fund, you've used up your emergency fund and you don't have enough money to pay your rent this month, and that's an awful situation to be in. Any further questions? So I hope that you found this useful. The budget spreadsheet is available. You can contact myself, Taylor, or Stephanie or Michelle if you're looking for additional copies of that. If you want a copy of this presentation, or reach out to Taylor or myself, or Natoa if you're looking for additional resources. Again, Taylor and I are happy to help you with your own preparing of a budget. I just can't tell you enough how it's such a valuable life skill to helping you get ahead in life and be able to have the money to do the things that you want to do. So thank you very much for having us today. Thank you, Natoa.
Thank you, Linda. That was awesome. Thank you so much. Very useful.
That was amazing. Oh my gosh. You just opened up my whole world to start looking at how I spend my money. I love it.
Thank you, Adam. I'm happy to chat with you on the side about your budget if you like as well. Just drop me an email.
Yay. Awesome. I love it. And tell Taylor, thank you also. I think a lot of us just, we don't see money as a useful item in our life that can give us some relaxation when we're older, you know, coming into 50 years old. I look back 20 years ago and I was like, what was I thinking? I could have taken money from this film, and instead of spending it on all my family and friends, I could have saved it for 20 years and then now spent it on my family and friends, you know? Oh my gosh. So I have a feeling I'm going to set up a plan that's going to be for the next 20 years, but not just for myself. It'll be for my family and friends, but also my children and my grandchildren. So you really opened a nice perspective.
Great. That's great. Yeah. And to your point, like budgeting is so much about not just about you and what you want, but what your family needs as well, right? Many of us have to contribute to the budget of our family. So it's a good exercise to do as a family as well.
Yeah. And just a little, I didn't even know about the TFSA. It's such a small amount to put in, and just to kind of guarantee a tax-free profile for later on in 10, 20, 50 years. Like you can just leave it in there, you know? It's pretty cool. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good savings vehicle. It's a great way to save money for down the road, and just putting aside a few $1,000s a year will make a huge difference for, you know, when you're no longer able to be a celebrity.
Yeah, I was talking to a group of people once. They were asking like, what do I do to, you know, manage my flow of money? And I said, well, I know a little bit of flow of money. So I said, you know, I don't drink soda pop, you know, soda drinks. So I said, if you take the amount of money that you buy to have your sugar crush, how much does that cost you per week? And I said, you multiply that, and that's what I'm saving for a month. because I don't drink that soda pop. And it goes with cigarettes. It goes with, going to movies. If I want to save money, I know that I can stop my going out to go movies and setting that, And I remember doing it once with my first child. At the time, his mom and I decided, let's take 7 months off of going out, not doing anything, but take care of our newborn for 7 months. And let's see how much we save. Oh my gosh, it was a lot of money, so yeah.
Yeah, trying, I've had a lot of kids try something like we refer to it as the Tim Hortons challenge, where it's like, don't go to Tim's for a month and then see how much you've saved that month alone, just by giving up one thing, or to your point, giving up pop. Or cigarettes is a huge one. They're so expensive. So if for anyone that smokes, that's a great way to save money, is to try to reduce or eliminate your cigarette consumption.
Yeah, because I was telling...
We need to let everybody go on their break.
Oh,
so they
sorry.
Come back all refreshed.
Okay.
So you guys can have a nice phone call if you like.
We'll talk soon. All right, everybody.
Give me his number.
Have a good break, everybody. We'll
have
see
a great
you
break.
soon. Okay, thank you.
Ciao.
Hold me down.